so for me, creativity has always encompassed art and writing from when I was very young, and it's something that's brought me a lot of joy and comfort in the past and in the present as well. But right now, since I'm a PhD student, my relationship with writing and art has changed. It's become more academic, and so it's made me realize that there's a lot of differences between academic and other writing, the way I look at art from an academic perspective versus the way I've looked at art in the past when I was younger, the way I did art, like practiced art as an artist. So while writing to an art earlier was something very simple and easy for me and something that I just did without thinking, now I find that sometimes I struggle with it. I think a lot about how I want it to be presented. And so I've realized that in my head I have a clear division of who my audience is when I'm writing or talking about art. And so creativity comes into both academic and other kinds of writing. So in I used to write many short stories and essays which were more free flowing, not necessarily about art, but just in general, and they were very free flowing in their verse. And that's what I thought creativity meant. It's like if you gave me a prompt, I would just write and I would edit it, but then it was very much just my thoughts as they were. But in my time, as especially as a PhD student, I've started to edit my writing in a different way. Not that I am trying to pretending to be someone else, but I just realized that for academic writing to be creative, it it is obviously in a measured way. Academic writing is meant for a particular kind of audience, and people think of it as boring, but it doesn't have to be. It I know it has a lot of jargon and terms that people might not be familiar with. If you ask me to read a science academic article, I don't usually make head or tail of it, but the writing can be creative even in academic writing. And so overall creativity writing, it's about communication and communicating an idea, a theme, feelings, and it could be to either someone you know, so that is whether it's academic or not, or it could be to a complete stranger. And so it's important to write in a way that connects to both these audiences, and make sure that your writing is clear. And so I know now I'm not talking about art practice. I'm talking specifically about writing, because and writing about art or writing about anything, you need to make sure that what you're saying can be understood by someone who may not know where you come from. So it's important to state things clearly. And if you think something is unclear, edit it, rewrite it, because if you think it's unclear, it's likely to be unclear. So I think now for me at this moment, overall writing and creativity is about clear communication and presenting your idea in a way that's inspiring to other people, but also in a way that is very much grounded in a reality that if it's academic, then that you have researched well, and if it's non-academic, that you are comfortable and have sat with for some time and feel overall comfortable sharing. So yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Closet Writer Chronicles. I'm your host Sangeeta, aka the Moody Marshmallow. You just heard our guest for today, Anisha Palat. Anisha is a PhD scholar in history of art at the University of Edinburgh. Her research focuses on the image of the cow in contemporary Indian art and its intersections with caste and animal studies. She has presented her research at conferences and workshops around the world and convenes the Climate and Colonialism Reading Group at the Paul Mellon Centre in London. Before we move into the conversation, I want to give a quick shout out to Zencastr, Podcasting Made Easy. So I've been podcasting for about 2 years now, and I stumbled onto Zencastr while I was recording season 2 of the show. Though I only use the audio recording version, they have a video recording feature as well, and you can now edit your episodes on the platform. If you're a podcaster looking for an all-in-one podcast workstation, then check out Zencastr. You'll find a special offer link in the description of this episode for which you'll get 30% off. Also, welcome back to season 3. I'm so happy to be back. Now, without further ado, let's tune in to hear about Anisha Palat's journey into the world of art and art history. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Closet Writer Chronicles. This week I have with me Anisha Palat. Hopefully I got that pronunciation right. If not, Anisha will very sweetly correct me. But welcome to the show, Anisha. It is so good to have you here.
Thank you, Sangeeta. And you did get the pronunciation right.
Yeah, Anisha and I had like a 2 minute tutorial of how to pronounce her last name. But no, it is so good to have you here, Anisha. And I'm so excited to talk to you about the work that you're doing especially about art and art history and art education. But the first thing I want to really ask you is what is your earliest memory of being creative?
Right. So that was a very good, it's a very good question. And the earliest memory which I have is something from when I was 3 years old, or maybe four. So I used to very religiously read Young World when it came out. I don't know if you remember Young
Oh,
World.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I used to be obsessed with it, and I used to play all the word games in it, and I used to really be fascinated with. So I think children of my age at that time would send in artworks, and they would be featured in Young World, and I always wanted my artwork to be there. So I remember I drew something once, probably some mountain, I don't know what it was, and I drew it thinking. So I looked at the newspaper, and I was like, I measured out the size that everyone's drawings were, because I didn't realize that you could draw any size and the newspaper designers would edit it and put it there. So I like measured it, and I made sure that it fit in that grid. And then I think I knew somebody who worked in for Young World, so I gave it to them, and they were like, "Why have you made it so small?" And I was like, "Oh, but everybody is that small in the paper."
Oh my
And yeah, so that's my first memory of like trying to do something creative and put it out in the open. But I did end up getting featured in Young World when I was about 8 years old. I wrote a piece on silence when I was in Rishi Valley, which is a boarding school, and that seemed to resonate with a lot of people. I personified silence. I described it as following me around the valley, and Rishi Valley is a very there's a lot of nature, and it's essentially a valley. And so the ways in which I interacted with silence, and I read it recently, and I have to say I'm quite impressed that as an 8 year old I was able to think about silence so deeply. But yeah, that so these are two early memories of creative art and creative writing, I guess.
No, but that's amazing that you were also able to kind of put yourself out there, right, at that age. Because usually, kids are kind of like, okay, I'll write, I'll draw, but you don't necessarily like put yourself out there so public or your work out there so publicly in that sense. And for listeners who may not be aware, Young World was actually this supplementary paper that used to come with the Hindu newspaper. I think they stopped it. I
Yeah,
don't
I
think it's
don't
there
think it's there
anymore.
anymore, but I used to really
Yeah.
like it. And it was a great way to get, I think, kids to engage with the news, I guess, easier than the full newspaper, which even now overwhelms me. So, yeah.
No, for sure. Like, because when you were talking about it, it was so nostalgic for me. Because when I was thinking of like, oh my God, every weekend when that paper would come and I would like just take it and read it. But yeah, no, but it's really cool that you had that confidence, honestly, to be able to do that. No, truly.
Thanks.
Um,
I think that confidence it disappeared after I grew up. It was only there as a child. So, yeah.
No, no, I don't think so. I think as we speak about the wonderful work you're doing, I think our audience will disagree on that and will say that you are a very confident person.
Thanks. Thank
Um,
you.
but but it's interesting that you chose art as a subject of study and you're kind of pursuing that professionally, which is not necessarily, I mean, now, okay, increasingly you do see people going for more creative options in terms of
Yeah.
career choices. But obviously I would imagine, while growing up, what was it like for you in terms of taking up art as a subject of study? Because that's not the most conventional choice. At least I know for our generation, it's usually either engineering, math, all that, or like law, medicine, whatever, right? So, how did you kind of come to the choice of studying art and now actually pursuing it as a profession?
So I always loved art, as with the Young World incident. I was drawing from when I was as I mean I don't remember a time when I wasn't engaging with some kind of. I used to love doing all the biology drawings in school. I used to love, anything that required some creativity. I would always volunteer myself, whether it was like a drama thing or, illustrating something. Even handwriting, I was obsessed with getting my handwriting perfect. So I think I liked anything visual. And so I went to Rishi Valley, and then after that I was studying in Chennai. And I was in ICSE, and in the ICSE board, you can take art as a subject. So in ninth standard, I took art as my, I think they used to call it sixth subject or something like that. And that's when I really started, doing it as a subject. We had class every week or multiple times a week, like you would have math and English and whatever. And so, I had to do various like still life or nature drawing or whatever. And even before that, though, in especially in Rishi Valley, we had an art department, and we used to like we put in these groups where we would try different things like woodwork, embroidery, something called nail and thread, and batik and tie and dye. So I guess we were very much immersed, and because it's a boarding school, you like live there all the time. So on the weekends also, I would find myself going to the arts and crafts department, and I had quite the teachers were quite inspiring and encouraging. And so I realized I loved art. And so that's why I took it as my sixth subject. And then I also took it in 11th and 12th as part of my more specialized subjects. But I never actually thought, I had thought that I would do economics. I used to also really like economics and math. And usually every time I say I like math, people are surprised, because I guess most art people, like, there's a clear divide somehow between art and math. And but I
That's
love
not true. Michelangelo was good at math.
That's true. So was Da Vinci, I think. But yeah, I really enjoy math. I miss doing math. That's the one thing I really do miss doing. And so but somehow I looked at, I don't know, I guess a lot of people applied to Stella Maris's visual arts program, and it looked interesting, and I applied and I got in, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do art for the next 4 years. And that was my official, like, in my undergrad, that was more art practice and design. And we had a bunch of various courses on like different kinds of drawing, which I won't get into. But then the nice thing about this the program at Stella was that we also had to learn art history and art theory. And I'm saying nice, I think most people hated it, but I loved that part. And I realized that I loved learning about the history of art movements and where all these techniques came from, and where the artist came from. And I used to, like, I don't know, I would do a lot of extra work in that more than the actual art part, which I also enjoyed. But somehow I was able to like, I really found my element, I guess, in writing about these various art movements and art theories and whatever. And so I decided, then I realized that art history is a career that people take up. And so I decided, I actually ended up doing art business immediately after my undergrad at Stella. And then I art business is a little bit different. It's more the business side of things. And after working in that space for a while, I realized I wanted to go back to the writing in a more academic theoretical sense. So I ended up switching back to art history, and that's why my I've pursued a PhD in art history and kind of moved away from the art business. But yeah, that's how I ended up here. It's not the most lucrative job option, but it is interesting and it definitely keeps me thinking. And art also engages with many different other fields, so it's a nice way to kind of keep abreast of what's going on in the world. Yeah.
Mm. No, but that's really cool. So then, when you talk about, because I'm curious about this, because when you talk about like art business, what does that essentially entail? I'm just curious to know about that.
Yeah, so I mean, so I guess of the most public facing art is art business, in the sense that there are collectors and they buy certain artworks, whether they are up and coming artists or whether they're well established artists, or older artists who have passed away. And so in those spaces, the main players are of course the gallerists and the people who own the galleries or own or run institutions, and the artists, of course, who make the work. And people interact with both in terms of collecting that art. Many people build their collections, and so that's a whole business. But the art business also involves a lot of other things like logistics, insurance, finance, even art law, auctioneers, curators, there are forgers. So it's a whole very wide ranging art network. And yeah, so like I have friends who work, say, in art logistics, which is a whole very specific field on like how to pack, and like a lot of the time the art has to travel country to country. So
Hmm.
it needs specialized packaging, specialized care. The insurance then go so there are art insurers. Then art law is like the restitution of objects, which is currently in the news a lot. So a lot of objects that were looted, say by the Nazis, for example, in World War II, should they be restituted to their rightful owners? So or like even the Parthenon marbles. This case became famous because Amal Clooney, George Clooney's wife, took it up, and so it was Greece was trying to get back the Parthenon marbles, which are in the British Museum. And there's a debate as to whether it should be or shouldn't be, and I won't get into that. But there are all of these big, the auctioneers themselves, the people who finally, the hammer goes down. You see these huge sales at Christie's or Sotheby's, and you see, yeah. So that's a job that people do, and so there is this whole network. And academics also do come into the art business because they write about the art. So the and a lot of the time curators come from academic backgrounds, and all the writing and the research and stuff might be, and not necessarily, you don't need a PhD always to get into those kinds of jobs, but it does. I think if you have a PhD, I guess you specialize in a certain field, and so yeah, I guess then people look at you for writing for that period of time, or artist, or whatever it is. So yeah, there's so many different roles and opportunities actually when it comes to art and visual culture, and it's a growing field now. So it's quite exciting, I think, to be in it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, because I think when we talk about art, also, I don't think people necessarily understand that there are way more roles than you actually connect it with. Because usually, I think people, the association is okay, there are artists, there are gallerists, there are collectors, okay, maybe auctioneers, but you don't go beyond that in terms of there is an actual business model, and there is an actual, like, because you spoke about art law, which it actually didn't even strike me when I was thinking about it, that oh my god, yeah, there is a separate category for
Exactly.
this you know so, but like, what are the roles you think that people just don't, I think of them when it comes to, because obviously you've mentioned a few,
Yeah.
but what are some of the things people don't think of at all? And the reason I'm asking this is because I work in publishing, and the minute I say I'm in publishing, the immediate thing is, oh, you must be an editor or a writer.
Right. Of
And
course.
yeah, and then when I say I'm handling rights and business development, they're like, oh, what is that? Like, what do you do there? And they're like, oh, that's also a thing, so you're also involved in finance and business. And And I'm like, guys, there's more to this. So I'm just
Exactly.
curious, like,
Yeah, no,
what is it in art?
yeah, no, I think mainly people don't realize that like art logistics, I think, is a big one, and insurance and the law, like you said. Um, I don't know how familiar people are with curators. I mean, it's, I guess, again, now people realize that someone curates, because I mean, there is the gallerist who usually is representing the artist to sell the work, and the artist makes the work, but then someone has to put the whole thing together as well if there's an exhibition. So that is usually the curator's job. I think people don't. Yeah, I think those are the main things that people. I mean, there are of course even smaller jobs, like uh, people who have to guard the art, for example, like because some of this art is worth millions, billions even, and so art. Security, that's a big thing as well. How do you secure and make sure this is safe? And then also how forgery, so there are forgers, and then there are people who can tell if it's a fake or not a fake, and that's a very important thing, especially in these large sales, because many of these artists, fakes of their works are sold, and you have to make sure that it's not a fake, and you have to trace something called the provenance, which is where it's it's first sale and like all its subsequent sales. And so it's yeah, there are lots of different aspects that go into the
Yeah.
final thing that people see.
Yeah, no, it's just fascinating to hear like what the different aspects are of the industry, right? In terms of like there's actually way more to it than I think people just can perceive,
Yes.
right, at one level. But having said that, I think coming to like your writing, right, how did you get into writing, and what has that been like for you, and how did you know that that was something you enjoy doing?
So I guess the main thing is that, again, I always liked it somehow from when I was a child. I don't know how. I think my mom read to me a lot as a kid, and then I used to consume a lot of books. So I always enjoyed words and felt like words were a strong communicator. And then I guess art also is a strong communicator as a visual. And so that's how I ended up, I think, writing about art in particular. But yeah, I think, in again, to go back to Rishi Valley, since it seems to have had such an impact on me, and I never realized till
And
I
Anisha's having a revelation
yeah,
of
I
this
know till I
episode.
start talking about it. But again, in Rishi Valley, we were really kind of thrust into writing. We used to write every week, or yeah, every week we were read to a lot, and then we wrote stories of our own, poems, a lot of creative writing, plays, and then we also had to write letters home every week, which was very, like, I mean, at that time I used to get irritated, but now of course it's so nice to receive a letter. And so I just had these different forms of writing that and it just, I think, at some point it just became part of my life. I guess I became more comfortable with words, uh, and I used to also bring art into my writing. So if I wrote a story, I would illustrate it. And so I think it just at some point became a very natural part of my life, something that I it just became part of my everyday almost. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. I mean, the fact that you were able to kind of stick with it also, right?
Yeah.
And kind of choose to incorporate it professionally, in a way.
Yes.
But yeah, having said that, how would you kind of talk about, say, art writing versus art criticism? Like, are they essentially the same thing, or?
No, I mean they are quite different, and I'm not. So I wouldn't call myself an art critic, for example. I would say
Okay.
I'm more an art historian, hopefully. But I mean, to a general public audience, I think it would be very similar. But there are actually even courses that specify that this is for art criticism, this is for art history, this is for art writing. I think art criticism, and I mean, I'm not speaking as an expert here, so I'm not.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like I shouldn't. I'll just tell you what I understand of it. It's more, um, you know, I would say that like reviews and reviews of exhibitions, or those kinds of things fall under the category of art criticism, whereas art historical writing may be more research oriented and kind of archival, like you go into, say, archives, and you draw out things and you argue a certain thing. But they do come together because art historians also do write reviews and critique exhibitions or shows or artists works, so there is an overlap. And there are some famous art critics the most famous art critic from India, I guess, is Geeta Kapoor, who kind of revolutionized the way we see Indian modern and leading to contemporary art. And as an art historian, I use a lot of her work and her writing, so I can't really separate the two. I would say there's a lot of overlap, and each uses the other's resources. um, the main difference, I guess, is that one is more drawing from history and kind of, I mean, not necessarily, because I write about contemporary artists who are living, so I definitely draw from history and then feed that into their work. Art criticism is more, yeah, I guess it's just a bit more refined criticality in a sense. Yeah.
No, because I was just curious, do they like classify as the same thing? Because obviously, even when it comes to writing about art or for art, there are again different aspects to this, right? Like, say, criticism and of course art history. um, I think, would curation also then be a different aspect to it? I'm asking again because I've seen you curate a show for a friend. Alamelo Annamalai, going to give a shout out here. A Soldier of Hope. I remember you curated
Yeah.
that show, if I remember correctly. And there were obviously written pieces along with
Yeah.
the artwork itself. And it's almost like a storytelling experience with the pieces that are already there,
Right.
right? So I'm just curious, does that also then, are there other forms like that then within
Yeah,
art?
I mean, I would say like curation and curating. I mean, it depends on how the curator wants to present the artist, and I guess also if you're involving the artist, how the artist wants to present themselves. And so, curating usually has like some display texts that go along with the work for explanation, or like even how to navigate an exhibition. And with, like, say, with exhibitions, you can have a catalog which has some writing, and so that writing needs to be in a uh, in a way that can communicate to an audience that is more on the collector side. So because I mean, very often artists are having exhibitions to sell their work, and so yeah, you have to be able to write in a way that uses some amount of academic jargon, but also is able to convince someone of a certain piece. And so I guess it kind of falls between the lines of how journalists might write, which is a more engaging way, so that everybody can understand what's going on, and like using academic jargon. It's a constant struggle because I've been told often, especially when I started my PhD, that my writing was more leaning towards the journalistic side rather than a pure academic side, and that's something that I had to overcome. And like, so I'm now very aware of the difference, but it's, to someone like, you only come to it the more you write. In the beginning, honestly, it all, I guess, looks similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because it's interesting again when you pointed out that for journalistic writing and academic writing is very different. So, like, from your perspective, what was the difference you found when you were doing both?
So definitely, academic writing requires the use of like certain words that are used in the field, terms, movements, etc., and also a lot more citations, references, theories, and it's very I mean, it's analytical and critical. academic writing, you need to be clear of what your position is as a writer, and what you're trying to argue in and convey to your reader and what you're saying. Whereas in a journalistic piece, while it is nice to have, I guess, an opinion, so you have editorials, etc., but often you're just trying to convey fact, and that this happened or this. So I would say that's the main difference. Also, I think academic writing is very much more formal. Journalistic writing is formal in its own sense, but it has, I guess, there is a little bit more room depending on who you're writing for, of course, the newspaper or magazine or whatever. But academic writing is very structured and usually requires a certain, like a kind of like an argumentative essay kind of thing. So yeah.
Hmm. Okay. So, something I came across in one of your articles that I read was where you spoke about collaboration,
Right.
where, just generally approaching a piece and writing about it is essentially a collaboration between you and the artist, right? Um, so, since that is something you talk about and you say is a way to facilitate dialogue essentially, how do you approach collaboration then when you're writing about an art
Right.
piece?
So, so in the currently, what I've been writing about for the last 4 years is has to do with living artists who are quite young in their practice, who are still growing their practice. And so, when I talk about so the one thing I should say is that collaboration usually means that both parties get something from the collaborative process. And I know that I have received a lot from artists. I don't know if I have given them anything, so I that's for them to say. But essentially what I mean is that it really helps to go and speak to these artists and understand where they're coming from, in what and how they've come to what they're trying to portray. And many, like, especially if it's a politically sensitive topic, or even if it's not a politically sensitive topic, it's really helpful to understand their context and their background. If you get the chance to even like visit their studio, or if they have a studio or whatever, wherever they practice their art, and see their process and their own thinking, because artists really do think a lot. And if you start to talk to them, you realize that their thought processes are very key to understanding their work. So I mean, while I can look at a piece of art without knowing who the artist is or anything about the artist, and of course analyze it, because art is also subjective, and you're allowed to analyze it by yourself if you want to. It is nice to have the artist's voice and your voice as an author come together, to convey. So I'm not saying that you should like blindly listen to what they say. If they say something and you don't necessarily see that in their work, or you disagree, that's okay. You're allowed to be critical of it, and you can say they said this, and but I don't see it that way. And but it's very, I feel personally that I have enjoyed talking to artists, and that dialogue that's created between me and the artist has helped me understand their work. And in my writing, I've always found that the stronger pieces are the ones where I have a good working relationship with the artist, where I can clarify things, where I can go back to them. And so that's what I mean by conversation, collaboration, dialogue.
Yeah. Are there any experiences you can share in terms of collaborations you've really enjoyed and you feel like, that was a piece you're extremely proud of and you're very happy to have worked on?
Yeah, I would say there's this artist called Kirtika Ken, who so I write about her in my thesis, and she works in Sydney. She's grown up in Sydney, originally from India, and I came across her work in another magazine article, and I felt that it was very relevant to my thesis. So I reached out to her, and she was very forthcoming and really nice, and we built a whole, I would say, friendship even at this point, because we really, yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I interviewed her more formally for my thesis, but then I was able to revisit the interview, revisit parts with her, ask her to clarify things. And if you become comfortable with one another like we did, then you're able. I think she was also able to share things because she trusted me. I hope, and I trusted her, and so you and so yeah, she's one example. There's another artist called Sarjan Mani. Again, he works in Germany at the moment. He's from Kerala, and actually I've never met him. So Kirtika I've met. Sarjan, somehow I never managed to meet him, unfortunately, though I'm a big fan of his work. And he's a performance artist, so it became, in his case especially, key to like listen to his experiences of both performing the art and where his ideas came from, because I actually didn't have access. There were no recordings of these performances, so I didn't know. So I was just listening to his account, and then wherever it was performed, if I managed to find some audience member or the gallerist who was able to share with me how the performance looked. But that reliance on the lived experience of these artists then became very important to the shaping of my own ideas, especially because I was writing about caste. And I
Mm.
obviously was not able to. I don't know why I said obviously, but I come from a position of privilege, I think, in terms of caste. And so it was very important for me to give space to the people I was writing about, because it's their lived experiences that they are portraying through their visual artwork or performance or whatever it is. And for me to just like say, oh, this is what it is unfair. And like like, especially in this case, I felt like for me to understand caste and understand art in relation to caste, to listen to their voices became really key. And it shaped my own understanding of art as a whole, of caste through art, and how visuals and art itself can be a form of pedagogy, I guess, in terms of teaching people like me about things that we should be discussing, but we don't somehow. And so, yeah, so that's how this whole collaborative process and space became really important.
Yeah, no, and I like that you mentioned these two because I did watch your interview with Kirtika Kane, and I loved how you spoke about. I think there was one section in the Q&A there where you spoke about how you guys were at an exhibition and everyone was seemingly from obviously an upper caste background, and they were only talking about visually how the art was appealing, and like they weren't going deeper into what the art actually meant and how a dialogue on that can actually promote that kind of conversation and understanding of the work,
Exactly.
which I thought was really like interesting and fascinating. And I do relate to that in the sense that I think literature does the same thing
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, having said that, the other thing you did mention, and which I was again curious to ask to know about, was about personal histories and collective histories, which is a term you keep using. And I don't know if I got this right from what I heard at the interview, but basically about how you were saying you were kind of using that as a source of interpretation, obviously, for the art. So then, how do you kind of use these two things as tools or a lens to sort of analyze artwork, right? How would you, first of all, explain personal history, collective history, and how do you kind of use it to make sense of the artwork?
So personal histories are very much linked to the artist's lived experiences. So, whether it is their own, so in the case of my thesis, it was their experiences with caste and the cow, which is what I write about, and so their own personal experiences, or their immediate family or friends. Experiences, which then become a personal history and personal narrative, very much a first hand experience for the artists themselves. Collective histories were more the larger. So, for example, in the case of Kirtika, she's very inspired by writers, other Dalit writers, like I think she likes Suraj Yengdeshi and Ambedkar, of
Mm.
course. And so why I'm calling them collective histories is because they're available to everybody. whether
Hmm.
you're upper caste or not upper caste, or wherever in the world you are, whether you're Indian, not Indian, those those pieces of writing are available for you to pick up and understand, and so they become part of a larger collective understanding of, in this case of course, caste collective histories can be about anything, I imagine. So when I and so in I try to combine, and Kirtika is a great example for this personal and collective history combination, because her experience of caste is in Sydney, because she grew up in Sydney, and so her experiences were more through her, what her parents shared with her, what her cousins might have shared with her, and then her collective experiences of caste were through her conversations with other artists nowadays. But when before she became, like, now she's relatively well known, but before that, she was reading a lot of literature, and so that became this kind of safe space for her, she felt. And so yeah, the so in bringing those two together, I was able to understand that her artwork portrayed both the personal and the larger collective understanding, though it's important to say that a collective understanding is not a homogenized experience. Everybody's experiences are different. But there is, there is this collective literature, writing, speaking, whatever it is, available to everybody if you want to read it. And so the nice thing about bringing the personal and the collective together is that there is an individuality, but then there's also this idea that kind of speaks to everybody.
Hmm. Interesting. So, like obviously we briefly touched upon your thesis, but I want to go into detail about that because I found it very fascinating when I was like researching about you. So, your research topic is the cow, caste, and contemporary art in India, aesthetic ecologies, and social hierarchies in the 21st century.
Correct.
So, can you tell us more about that? Because I think it's really fascinating that you're kind of even researching this as a subject, first of all. So, like, how did you come across this and what drew you to this? And obviously, what are you aiming to do with the study, basically?
Yeah, so sorry, I know the title is a mouthful, but academic thesis dissertation titles are long usually. But essentially, I came to this topic because in about, I think, 6 years ago or 7 years ago, someone asked me to write an article on. So there was an issue coming out about livestock in India, and so someone was like, "Hey, can you write this article about representations of cows in India?" And that was very general. And when I started researching about it, I realized that despite the cow being such a prevalent animal and featured in most of our daily lives in some way or the other, somehow the art part of the cow had not really been explored or written about. And so I thought, and so once I wrote that article, which was more an overview, I was trying to look for PhD programs, and this was an idea that I thought could develop. And in the beginning, it was more general. I was just trying to understand what is missing, though I was always interested in the more modern and contemporary periods. Um, but there is this whole history of the cow image that started in the late 19th century, and then how the cow kind of became this image of religion, and especially linked to Hinduism, and how the cow is linked to caste because of that, because the of beef eating, especially, or leather, the making of leather, and how those professions, or um, and the ostracization of Dalits or other communities who consume beef. It's all related to the cow. And so I decided that it would be nice to see how contemporary artists, if they do represent that, how they represent that. And so my thesis kind of explores these four different artists. So Kirtika and Sajan, who I mentioned, are two of them, and then I have an older artist called Chandru, and then another artist called Siddesh Gautam, who is Bacon
Oh, yeah.
Prasad on
Yes.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's quite
Yeah.
well known. And so I have these four very different, because Kirtika works with materials, Sajan is a performance artist, Siddesh is more digital, and Chandru, who's older, is more traditional in his, like, he does the ones I analyze are watercolor paintings. And so my thinking was basically, how do I the fact that the cow in India, though we see it every day, we engage with it in some form every day, and then now there's a lot of politics around the cow as well. My thinking was that at we never sort of acknowledge it as an animal. Whenever we think about it, though it is so obviously an animal, we tend to make it more a symbol or an image. And so there's this whole side to art history, which is a growing field, which is called eco-critical art history. And um, so my idea was, how do you bring this image and the animal together in a way that you acknowledge the cow for the fact that it's an animal, and you also acknowledge the atrocities that happen in the name of the cow to these artists, like what they're representing. How do you bring those together to kind of disrupt systems of oppression like caste, which have a very long history in India? And so that's basically what I explore in the thesis.
That's really interesting. Actually, it reminds me of this book by Yashaswini Chandra called "The Tale of the Horse:
Yeah.
A History of India on Horseback," which like she again, it's but there it's obviously in your case it's the cow, in her case she's talking about the horse and how that kind of relates to history. But yeah, it's I think it's a really cool study what you're doing, and who knows, maybe someday you will publish it as a book. I hope
Maybe
you do.
first I have to get through the thesis.
The
Actually,
dissertation.
yeah, Yashaswini is now at University of Edinburgh, so I know her quite well. So
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So, I mean, if you want to pitch a book, just go for it, Anisha.
yeah,
Publishers, if you're listening, this is the book you should be looking at
yes,
right
I
now.
agree. Yeah,
But no, thank you so much for sharing about that. It is a very fascinating study that you are doing, and to kind of use art as a tool to sort of, I think, talk about larger things in society, right?
yeah,
Or just generally things that are going on, which I think is cool because I think by the end of the day, that is one of the things that art does. It is essentially a sort of observation or comment or making a statement essentially or a reflection of basically what's going on
yes,
in the world. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And the next thing what I do want to ask you is about Art Student Thoughts,
right.
which is an art education platform which you started with Varsha Narayan, who is also an art educator. So what inspired that, and what's the idea of starting it, and what are you hoping to achieve with Art Student Thoughts?
So Varsha and I studied together for our undergrad, and then she did a master's in art history while I did art business, and then now I would say now she's more the art educator, and I'm just trying to write and survive. But anyway, she so when we started Art Student Thoughts, our thinking was that. There is not, like, people get overwhelmed when you say, like, when you ask them to look at an artwork, and they don't know where to start, and so they just kind of run away from it. And so we wanted to share how to look at art, how to understand art, that it's not scary, and also just general information about art, because nobody, somehow the resources are limited, or they're very academic. So again, it's difficult for a general audience to just understand what's going on. And so we our idea was that let's try and, like, have these snippets which interest everybody, and then we found that people are interested in knowing about art. And we did an art walk in Chennai, and then we've also helped some schools with workshops, and we designed a syllabus. And so basically the idea was that let's educate people about art in a simple and fun way. And we used to have a lot of quizzes on our Instagram page, for example, which I think those were particularly popular because I guess people felt that they could answer and it didn't matter if it was right or wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I've taken those
Yeah,
quizzes.
so yeah, I think that our aim was essentially this, like, let's spread this joy that we get from art to other people and show them that art is for everyone and meant to be this, like what you just said, like it can be a tool for for understanding issues and also appreciating, visually or non-visually, just material or histories or color, or so it can, there's so many different ways to look at art and analyze it. So yeah, that was our idea.
Yeah, no, and it's cool that you are doing that because, like you said, I feel like art can be fairly, can seem fairly inaccessible
Yeah,
to the general population or to people who might be curious about it but are kind of scared to approach it because it's intimidating,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So it's really nice to see that you guys are doing that. Another platform I am aware of and which I follow is Art Fervor, which also kind of is in this space of art education in India.
yeah.
um, but having said that, why do you think art education is significant today, or why do you think it's important?
So I guess it kind of it takes from everything we've discussed so far that art has so much that it can convey. It's a tool that can be used to convey ideas and issues, and it's also a way in which different people can learn different things. So there are many different kinds of learners, and while not everybody is necessarily a visual learner, I think art has something for everybody. You can understand, you can read about the art and then go see it. You can just look at it and say, oh, this is what I get from it. So in that sense, if you're made to feel comfortable with art from a young age, which is why art education starting at a young age is really important, then you appreciate the world around you, you appreciate nature, you appreciate colors, you appreciate photography, you appreciate creativity in general. And I think all in all, art makes you a better person, I guess. I like to think so, at least. But it's in India we don't have much of a museum culture, or
Yeah.
we don't go to shows as much, art shows, when we're young kids. I'm hoping that will change, because I have seen, like in the UK, for example, sometimes you see really small kids at museums, and it's so cute because they look so fascinated, and they don't have that inhibition to say what they're thinking. And I can see that they're really enjoying it. I'm sure some of them are really bored, but but they're still there, and so something is being imbibed, and I think there is a certain value to that. And art doesn't necessarily have to be visual art. I mean, it can be music or performance or theater or literature, or arts in general. But having that, like, I think that it really makes you question things and not just accept things for what they are. And that's something that we should all do. We shouldn't just say, oh, this is how the world is. We should be questioning, and that's how we grow, and that's how collaborations work. For example, you ask questions, you learn. And so I think that's where the importance of, I mean, education in general, of course, and art helps in that, because there's a lot of scope within it to be flexible and fluid.
Mm. So, what are, like, I think, resources you would recommend for people who are just curious about art and want to kind of explore and just educate themselves? What are some of those that you'd recommend?
So I would say that the first thing is, go to the shows and museums in your city, whether they're small or big. Go to archaeological sites and see things, because that experience that you have firsthand, that's the best way to learn about art. And rather, because reading about art, like seeing a painting in a book, and then reading about it, can be quite boring sometimes. It can really bog you down. So if you're just starting out, I would recommend trying to get out there, speaking. And like if the artist is at the show, speak to them, understand where they're coming from, why they've done the work. And even if you feel shy, um, the artist is as shy as you, I guarantee. And so just go and speak. They'll be so happy that someone is taking interest in their work and actually asking them questions. So that's the first way. But then there are like, I mean, obviously you can read about art. I would recommend John Berger's Ways of Seeing. It's a very easy read, a great start. He also has a TV show. I mean, he had a TV show which is, I think, available on YouTube. So it's very easy to go through, and like he's very engaging in what he says. There's Gardner's Art Through the Ages, which is a more little bit more complex book, but it's quite large. It's expensive, so it's a more like a coffee table book, but it has beautiful pictures and gives a good overview of art through the ages, essentially. And then I would recommend going to, like, if you can't actually visit museums and stuff, just going to different museum websites around the world. Some of them have some very interactive stuff, like the MoMA in New York. It has a good art education section. So that's one. Google Arts and Culture is also really nice. They actually have a
Oh,
Chrome extension which I use. So is you can set it that every day it'll, like, your Chrome background will be a new painting, and you
oh
can
wow.
learn about it. And that's a really nice way. I've learned about a lot of really random pieces that I didn't know about, or artists that I'd never heard of. And so it's a nice way to cheer, like your desktop or laptop or whatever actually cheers up with this artwork every day, and you can learn about it if you want, or if you don't want to, you'll just look at it and you might remember it, which is nice. Another way is to watch, like, shows. There's a show which I haven't really watched much myself, but my mom loves it. Actually, it's called Fake or Fortune. So it
Oh,
it
okay.
it traces, like, it looks at artworks and whether they are fakes or or they're worth a fortune. And it really goes through all of those different roles in art business that I had said. They go to
Hmm.
these different experts and forgers, and it's a really well made show, and it's a great way to, like, it's very because it's quite dramatized. It's a great way to, like, understand and be excited about art. And another way is to watch live auctions. If you're interested in collecting art, a great way would be to track auctions and watch them. Some of them are boring, some big sales can be interesting. And then another way is to just engage with fictional accounts. Like, for example, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, which is a famous artwork by Vermeer, is it's a book. It's also a movie. There's Lust for Life, Agony and Ecstasy, The Goldfinch, Picture of Dorian Gray. They're all books and movies. And so that's a nice way, because they are fictionalized, but then you at least get curious about it. Or even like something like the Da Vinci Code. Um, I remember when I first read it, it really piqued my curiosity about, oh, like, artworks can have all these hidden meanings. Oh my God. And so I was very fascinated by that. So, it's good to, like, try all these different things. And then, of course, if you like, and then if as you get more into it, you can read more academic stuff. But what I've recommended is not academic, because I think that's a very particular kind of audience. And I think in general people find it difficult, and maybe start I don't want people to hate art.
Yeah.
So let's stick to the more fun stuff. Yeah, and also, like,
Yeah.
doing quizzes and stuff is a great way to, I think, just grow your knowledge, I guess. So
Yeah. On that note, follow Art Student Thoughts on
yeah, but we
social
haven't been
media.
very active lately, I have to say. But
Well, I mean, this is a great start. Whenever this episode comes out, Arisha and Varsha will be
yes,
reviving the
we'll
page,
we'll make
hopefully.
sure quiz is out on the same day. Yeah.
Oh, sounds good. Oh, we're cross promoting now.
Yes.
That's great. But no, thank you so much for sharing those resources. Because I think it is important to kind of make it more accessible for people because, like I said, it just, I think that's one of the biggest things because like I mean, like I can't say from an artistic perspective, but at least when I was also making the decision to kind of switch from a corporate career to like writing and to get into publishing, I know those were conversations that were not the most accessible to me.
Yeah.
And they were also very intimidating just in terms of like it just seems so like beyond reach that you don't know. And so it's nice to kind of have people you can talk to and have those conversations you can put out so others have access
Yeah.
to them
Yeah.
and those resources. So thank you for doing that, and more power to you and Varsha with what you're doing with Art
Thank you.
Student Thoughts.
I'll let Varsha
Honestly,
know. We
yeah.
keep saying we should restart and we just don't. So maybe this is the inspiration.
Yeah. It's like, hey, Varsha, Anisha just planned to start this without even informing you.
Yeah.
Oh my God. But yeah, having said that, coming to I think more personally for you, what are like who are the artists that kind of, I guess, inspired you and drew you towards actually learning about art and art history and kind of getting into this field? Because I know for like many people there are many things that can inspire you to kind of go into things, like even for writing, for example. Like I think for me, story wise but also writing wise, I think a writer really enjoy is Louisa May Alcott, Little Women, because that's a story I always mention it on this podcast. I think everyone's sick, everyone's who heard these episodes, I think, are sick of me talking about
It's
this
a
book,
great
but it
book.
really does. It is a great book. So that is definitely a story that has like stuck with me, like since forever, since I was a kid, or even like a Roald Dahl or whatever, right? In that way, who are artists you'd say that have really like inspired you and like kind of drawn you towards this field?
It's a tough question because I guess it depends on I guess it depends on what I'm looking at the time. I think any art that speaks to social times can be powerful, not necessarily the most pleasing to look at, but they really make you think. In terms of like, I guess before I really like now I do a very niche topic in like 21st century art and caste in the cow, and so that's like a very specific set of artists who obviously because I've been engaging with their work so deeply now, artists who I've mentioned, like Kirtika and Sajan and Chandru and Siddesh, are all the ones that I'm currently like very inspired by and constantly looking at. But in the past, when I was younger, just getting into this whole art field, I always had a soft spot for, and I think most people do, for impressionist and post impressionist work like Monet. And they're very pleasing to the eye, I guess. And you just feel like, I don't know, there's something just really nice about them. I also like modernists like Matisse. So Matisse was, I think, in the early 20th century, and I mean, most people know him for his Fauvist works, which is a whole movement, but I actually really like his paper. Like, towards the end of his life, he couldn't physically stand and draw anymore. So he started doing these paper cutouts, which then eventually became stained glass windows. And I've always really liked that. And I'm a big fan of drawings by Leonardo da Vinci. I've always been, I think, the detail and technique in them is just amazing. I also, I mean, in addition to just like these are pure artists in the sense of like fine artists, but to expand the field a little bit, I've always really liked illustrations in books like children's books. Like you mentioned Roald Dahl, I always liked Quentin Blake's illustrations. And I think that's why as a kid, I used to always grab all of Roald Dahl's books because the illustrations made them so appealing. I also really like graphic novels like Mouse or Persepolis. I mean, those are, of course, well known ones. And then, yeah, I mean, there's an artist now called, her name is Ritika Merchant. I think she's based in Barcelona. I find her work it's quite like mythological, whimsical, very like detail oriented, I find it personally very pleasing. And then I think yeah, and I've also like films like Studio Ghibli movies. The artwork
Yeah,
in the Ghibli movies has
love.
always
Yeah.
been very inspiring, and I find that even now that's something that's my comfort viewing. I think like when I'm sick I always watch a Studio Ghibli movie. So I just find find the artwork in them just so beautiful. And so, so yeah, I guess art can be, so it was all these different things that kind of inspired me, I guess, to yeah, I'm sure I'm missing many names, but yeah, this is, I mean, this is who's coming to mind at the moment, at least. So yeah.
No, I mean, it's yeah, Studio Ghibli, I think, has like the warmest, I think, stories, honestly. Um,
And so
yeah, and
thoughtful as well, I mean, yeah.
yes, I think Howl's Moving Castle is my
Yeah,
favorite. Spirited Away is a great one, but I think Howl's Moving Castle is my
your
all-time
all-time
favorite.
favorite. I can't
Yeah.
choose, I think. It's so hard. Yeah. Actually, I think they've recently come out with a new one which I haven't seen yet. I think it's
Oh.
called The Boy and His Heron or something. It's just come out in like July of this year. So,
Ah.
yeah.
Oh.
But hopefully
I
it
shall
will
check that.
release in theaters in India. I don't know. I would love to see a Ghibli movie in the theater. I don't think that's ever happened. So,
Yeah, no, I mean everything's on
yeah.
Netflix at the
Yeah,
moment.
exactly.
but but no, no, but it's really cool to hear that. But also then having said that, even then with writing, would you say there are books or writers who inspire you and who you really whose work you really enjoy and
Yeah.
like?
Yes. I mean, I've always really enjoyed children's books for some reason. I guess the simplicity,
Okay.
but the way they're written. So, like Roald Dahl, I read a lot as a kid. I also read a lot of Enid Blyton as a kid, though now when I think
Same.
about Enid Blyton, I guess
Yeah, I know.
lots of problems there. But as a child, I used to really like, especially the boarding school stories like Malrita's and St. Clair's, and then I used to really like Anne of Green Gables.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one.
And so as a kid, and then again, I was also a big Harry Potter fan, but again, problems there now.
J.K. Rowling.
Like this is the thing. Like maybe I should just not know about the actual authors at all. But recently, yeah, I've enjoyed Anne Patchett's work. So the Dutch
Ah, okay.
House,
Dutch House.
yeah, I
Okay.
really like that. Elena Ferrante's series, My Brilliant Friend, and the three
Ah.
books after that. That was a very intense. I read all of them in 1 week, and it was. It's like a very, because the book is talking about essentially quite a toxic friendship and relationship, and so it. I remember it really, like, it tugged at some heartstrings, I think, and then Elmet by Fiona Mosley. I think that's another book I recently enjoyed. And then I've also really been enjoying translated books a lot recently.
Okay, yeah.
So there's one called Cobalt Blue by Sachin
Yeah, yeah.
Kulkarni. Yeah, so I really like
Yeah, yeah.
that.
It's been made into a
Oh,
film
has
also
it?
on
Oh, yeah,
Netflix.
yeah. I
Yeah,
saw
yeah.
the trailer and then I was
Yeah.
worried about whether or not I should watch it. And then The Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I've heard of this book. I've not read it. It's on my
Yes,
reading
I
to
think you
read
should
list, yeah.
read it because I know you like cats as well. So definitely,
Yeah.
it's a very touching journey of a cat and the owner of the cat. And Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. That's another one I recently
Oh,
read, which was a very interesting book about China, and like, yeah, it was a very nice. It's not a very long book, but yeah, nice, very nice. And then I've also really been enjoying Ambedkar's writing recently, but of course
mm.
that's more for my thesis.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, I'm reading other authors who write about caste and the animal, like you mentioned, Yashaswini Chandra, and there are many others. So yeah, those are some of the books and writers recently.
Yeah. No, I really like some of the recommendations you gave, and I think I'm definitely gonna look some of those up and read them for sure. When you mentioned Persepolis, I was actually thinking of Marianne Satrapi's other book,
Yeah,
Embroideries,
oh,
which is
that's
another.
great. Yeah, that's a really
It's
nice one.
it's yeah.
And not,
I read that I think a couple of months ago, and I really enjoyed
yeah,
it.
it's really good. I mean, she really has something else in terms of her storytelling and
Yeah.
drawing skills, I guess.
Yeah, and it's like very strong, I think, statements she makes with
Yes,
her writing,
yeah, very, very,
and her work.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah, no. But yeah, a book I think you might like, because when you're talking about the kinds of things you were reading, and I was just like, oh, like I don't know, you might, I don't know if you've read this. It's called Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri.
I've heard a lot about it, and a lot of
Yeah,
people have recommended it to me, and I haven't
yeah.
yet got around.
It's the first book she wrote in Italian. So yeah, that was, I read that very
Right.
recently. I thought that's a
Nice.
nice book.
I will.
Um,
Yeah, I also have to read. What is the name of the book? Hamnet, I think.
Oh yes, even I've been looking to read Hamnet. In fact, one of my guests from the last season, Shumanto Chattopadhyay, he recommended that book on the episode. Yeah, he was like, "You must read." He was like, "Hamnet." It's about Shakespeare's
Yeah,
wife,
and she's
Anne
also
Hathaway.
written
Yeah,
another
so
book called The Marriage Portrait, which my mom is reading now and
yes,
is really
yeah.
enjoying. In fact, she was like, "Oh, thank God you're going to record this. Now I have time to read." As though I like interrupt her time all the time. But
Hey, reading is important. So read your books, kids. It's a great hobby
it
to
is.
have.
It really
But
is.
but yeah, I think, before getting towards the end of the interview, one thing I did want to ask is, so I mean, obviously, you are in the space of art as a career. Having said that, what are the misconceptions you've faced about the field you've in? Not just about you, but maybe just generally, like, absurd comments or observations or just assumptions you've heard from people about people who work in art.
I think the most common one is my child could have done that, which is the famous one. But it really happens. Like, really, I've heard people look at art or seen me like explain about art and say, but what's so great about that? I mean, my child could have done that kind of thing. So that's the most common one. I think a lot of people think it's very easy, and like that art is a very simple thing to understand and write about, and like, oh, and like, what's the point of it really, and I think people are very taken aback that someone would choose to do a career in this field, because like they don't see value in it, and that's quite sad, but that is just the way most people, like, it's more, they are looking for more conventional career paths, which, I mean, in terms of uh, yeah, I guess in terms of money, that's nicer. But sometimes, I mean, it's not that there are art jobs which pay really well as well. Just you have to just look in the right places, and yeah, I think mostly it's just that people are disbelieving that something that is so simple can have so much value, especially like art that's sold for billions. I've heard people ask, like, why is this sold? And there are so many reasons. I mean, it's not only the art itself, it's about, like, oftentimes it's about who owned it earlier, where it's coming from, who's buying it, and it's a whole, like, that the competition between buyers as well can drive up price. So yeah, I think those are actually, I think, Varsha and I have an Instagram reel on something like, what are the funniest things we've heard people tell us about art or something. Yeah.
Okay, wow. And then, okay, having said that, what is the reality check you'd like to give people who want to get into art? Because I know in publishing, people have this, they're like, oh, like, I want to be a writer, I'll send my manuscript and it'll get published in like 2 months. And I'm like, guys, that's not how it
Yeah, I
works.
know, publishing is a whole other thing, isn't it? The reality check is that it's a growing field, and it can be very difficult to find your voice and find your space, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there and speak to people and speak to artists and speak to gallerists or whomever, and understand that it's not, I mean, I don't think you'll ever, if you're looking for a job that will make you a billionaire, this is not necessarily the job for you. But it is a job that gives you a lot of happiness and satisfaction. Obviously, there are problems as well, but it's really a nice way to communicate with people and understand. If you're like into social issues and people, and like understanding psychology and literature, I think art is a great way to go. And also, I think yeah, art and science, increasingly I'm seeing a lot of there's a lot of meeting ground there. I have a friend who's a wildlife biologist, and she and I were talking about a collaboration again, like how can we bring these two, like she studies animal behavior and I study animal representations in art, and is there a way to kind of bring those two together from a science and art perspective, which I think is very important, that these like binaries don't exist and that we can all work together. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, I think more or less it does. I think it's basically just like keep your head on your shoulders and do what you need to do. Like work hard and like I think be smart about what you're
yeah,
doing also,
definitely.
essentially. Yeah. But yeah, on that note, we are now coming towards the end of this interview, and we always end with these last two questions. So the first one is, what are your aspirations? What is something you're looking forward to in the near or distant future?
The thing I'm looking forward to currently is my thesis defense, which is in November. I mean, I'm not looking forward to it. It intimidates me, but I'm looking forward to having an end to this thesis. And it was really a very emotional experience writing this whole document and submitting it just about a month ago now. And so, yeah, I think my aspirations are trying to find a job or research post in this field of art history, which kind of speaks to my interests of art and animals and ecology and uh, social issues like caste as well, and trying to find a space where I can talk about these things, which and a way to continue convincing people that art is a tool and for learning and pedagogy, and it is a very fluid space in which many different possibilities exist.
And finally, what is one thing you would like to tell people, or you would like for people to know? It can be a piece of advice or just something you've learned in life, can be personal, professional, creative, anything.
Um, One, I'll just repeat that art is a fluid space, and it has a lot of possibilities. So do art. Don't be scared about whether it's like writing about art or practicing art yourself. Just do it. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. There is no right way. It's a very enjoying and satisfying experience to paint something or draw something. So just start doing it, I guess, at some point. And yeah, I mean, that's something personally I've stopped practicing art so much, and I really miss it. So I think that's something that I advise people to do, and I should take that advice myself, I guess. And the other thing is, um, I'm not the most, like, I've always found it hard to go up to people and talk to them and ask them like about their art or career or whatever. But it is the way I forced myself to do it, and it is the way that I have grown individually and had conversations and learned a lot about the world. And so I recommend that you should try and overcome that fear and go out there and ask questions. Always ask questions. That's essentially what I'm saying. Like, just always question everything. There is no wrong question. um, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And on that lovely note, we have come to the end of this interview. Thank you so much for being here, Anisha Palat. Did I get that
You
right?
did, you did.
After 10,000 times, I have now mastered saying that name. But anyway, but no, really, thank you so much for taking the time and being here. I think it was a really insightful conversation. I think just understanding the world of art more, what you're doing also with your role, and what you're hoping to achieve, and more power to you. And yeah, hopefully we'll have a conversation again sometime in the future. Who knows? But yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So that was my conversation with Anisha Palat. I really enjoyed recording this episode and learnt a lot about the art world. closing this episode with an article written and narrated by Anisha. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next week with a new guest and a new chronicle to share. Talk soon!
So I'm going to read out an article that I wrote for Outlook magazine's special Independence Day special issue. And so it just came out in August 2023, and it kind of it's drawn from my PhD research, and I think it speaks to everything that I spoke about in the podcast in terms of it straddles the line between drawing from academic writing and journalistic writing, and kind of I try and achieve a balance of both. So I'll read. So it's called A Canvas of Exchanges. In the early hours of 6 January 2021, long before Donald Trump's supporters stormed the Capitol, and when the world was still reeling from the horrors of the COVID-19 pandemic, a strange silence washed over me as I stared at my laptop screen, transfixed by the work of artist Kirtika Ken. Here was a visceral image of vast blackness with hints of gold and red glinting from beneath its powerful surface. Swirls of a tar-like substance glowed on my screen, held together by what seemed to resemble clay and cracked soil. The work emanated a certain resilience for reasons unknown to me at the time. It also spoke volumes for its aesthetic potency and careful use of color and material. I wondered about the title of the work, Jin Amutsa, recalling a book with the same title. Eager to know more, I emailed Kirtika, mentioning that I was pursuing a doctorate in art history and would like to discuss this work in more detail for inclusion in my thesis. Not only did she very kindly reply to my initial request for more information, but she also generously offered me glimpses into her life as an artist from the Dalit diaspora. I mentioned my interaction with Kirtika to highlight the value and insight conversations with artists bring to art criticism and art writing. Through multiple exchanges, I learned, for instance, that Jin Amutsa was inspired by the seminal book with the same title, The Prisons We Broke in English translation, by Bebitai Kamble, that speaks of the Mahars in the early 20th century. I discovered that Kirtika had created this piece over the early phase of the 2020 worldwide lockdown in her Sydney home, occasionally even in collaboration with her mother, who helped form a huge part of Kirtika's understanding of her Dalit identity. I understood Kirtika's careful curation of materials, beeswax, tar, charcoal, cow dung, religious thread, and gold leaf, to name a few, to be a redefining of these largely religiously charged materials on her own terms in the safe space that was her studio. I started to appreciate Kirtika's narrative on the canvas as a visual rendition of a personal and collective inheritance, an untold story that was becoming a living archive. Most importantly, I realized that while her artwork partly spoke of a story of historical suffering, it also had elements of joy and power, and was a celebration of her own Dalit identity and culture, a culture that Kirtika suggests can exist outside of protest. My collaboration with Kirtika highlights the pedagogical role that art can play in society today. I use the word collaboration here to insist on there being an alliance between the artist and the person writing about the artwork. A collaboration suggests an ongoing dialogue, and this remains a crucial part of writing about art, especially when writing about the work of living artists. A collaborative space also allows for opinions to form and grow. The pedagogy that I cited is in relation to this collaboration. When viewing pieces like Jin Amutsa, viewers are often left wondering about the implications of the artwork. But what does this mean is a common chorus that echoes in spaces where art is displayed. Indeed, what does a work like Jin Amutsa connote? In my first viewing of it on my laptop in early 2021, was it simply the aesthetic power of the work that captured my attention? Or did I imagine there was more to the story, and that a work of art must have a narrative in order for us to appreciate its aesthetic prowess even further? Circumstances point to the latter, for I immediately reached out to Kirtika, insisting on acquiring more context, not satisfied with just looking at the art and accepting it in its swirl of blackness. Kirtika's subsequent narrative and my interpretation of it as viewed in her art underlies our collaboration and illuminates a learning on my part as art historian. This learning is crucial in the context of artists like Kirtika who talk about caste in their art. It becomes foundational in understanding the genealogies of caste narratives and in highlighting my own protected ignorance, as Y.S. Alone terms it. This is not to say that it becomes the artist's role to educate the larger public about histories of oppression. Rather, I am trying to highlight the power of the visual and the flexibility in its interpretation as being instrumental in changing attitudes, forming opinions, and presenting caste as a heterogeneous expression of personal and collective histories and ongoing circumstances. My own learning from speaking with artists like Kirtika, Sarjan Mani, who shared thoughts on performativity, animality, and caste, Prabhakar Kamble, who showed how a horrific incident like the flogging of Dalits and Una could be reflected in performance art, G. Chandru and Savarkar, older artists who spoke about caste in the mainstream art world long before caste was openly addressed, Rajashri Goody, who shared the delights of eating and Dalit food recipes, Siddesh Gautam, who curated the digital space to revolutionize art expressions in relation to caste, Jai Singh Nageshwaran, who captured honest photographs of varying narratives, and reading scholars such as Y.S. Alone, Anjali Arondekar, Gary Tartikow, Deepta Achar, Santosh Sadanandan, and Brahma Prakash Singh has been invaluable. The artists have generously shared their narratives with me, emphasizing my earlier reference to collaboration. The artists I mention here are just a small fraction of the large number who broach caste in their work. I only refer to these artists since I have had direct communication with them. Also, in turn, the scholars' writings have shaped my own thoughts on categories like Dalit art, caste life narratives, performativity, and theatre, and the idea of maza or joy in expressions of caste. My aim here is to offer reflections of my own interactions with artists and scholars, emphasize the pedagogical and collaborative role that I found to be inspiring in my learning about art, art practice, and artists' lives, and the context in which these are placed. Aesthetic choices remain pertinent to the art that is finally produced. Deepta Achar calls the aesthetic in relation to the category of Dalit art a site of political challenge. Art then seems to be placed in a paradox, where it holds a unique position of highlighting centuries of oppression while also wanting to be appreciated just in terms of its beauty and aesthetics. Does the art exist only to draw attention to the social and the political, or can it exist outside of protest, be removed from the socio political context, and be treasured for its powerful use of materiality, like in Jin Amutsa? The visual power of art is colossal. Art's magic memorializes stories, aesthetics, and individuals. It leaves me asking questions in a way that non visual learning renders impossible. In places like India, where Dalits face discrimination in dehumanizing ways on a daily basis, romantic notions of art as a site of resistance perhaps seem misplaced. But a push towards dialogue in art history, where value is given to being in conversation with living artists, is crucial in contemporary society. The role art plays in society as a tool of survival, understanding, and pedagogy must be acknowledged. I have learned through art, and it is in this learning that I have seen power, joy, history, and beauty unfold as visual vocabulary for time immemorial.